Daf Yomi, tractate Bava, Batra, page 148b, top of the page, with the words Iboy Lahu. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Beis lechad yoyt lechad mahu mi havishiu oilo im timseloma beis lechad v'yoyt lechad lo havishiu chutz v'yoyt mahu. If one sold the house, meaning a lower story, to one person, and stated that the upper story will be sold to another person, what is halacha? Is this considered reserving additional rights for the second person apart from the upper story or not? If you say that in the case where one sells his house to one and the upper story to one, a stipulation is not considered reserving rights for the second person, there's another dilemma. If one sold the house except for the upper story, reserving the upper story for himself, what is the halacha? Is this considered reserving additional rights for himself? Amarav Nachmin. Im timselome beis leechad yoyt leechad lo havi shiur chutz midyota havi shiur ali v'dor zvid damash im rotzel hoitzi ba zizin moitzi. Rava said that Rav Nachman said, even if you say that where one sells the house to one person and the upper story to one person, he is not considered to be reserving rights for the second person. If one sold the house except for the upper story, he is considered to be reserving additional rights for himself. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Zvid, who says that the reason the seller reserves additional rights is that if he wants to extend projections from the upper story into the space of the courtyard, he may extend them. Alma we see, kivan the shadiota, makom zizin namishayo. Hachanami kivan the alma chutz mi peroisav makom perishayo. The Gemara concludes, evidently, since he reserved the upper story, he also reserved the place of the projections. Here too, with regard to the one who gave a palm tree to another and reserved the fruit for himself, since he said that the tree is given to another fruit, except for its fruit, he reserved the place of the fruit for himself as well. Amar Rav Yosef bar ben Yumi Amar Rav Nachman shchiv mira shekosov kol lechas v'lachen roin im v'machalik meis kanu kulan amad choyz b'chulan. The Mishnah in 146b states that if a person on his deathbed granted all his property to others but reserved for himself any amount of land, his gift is valid even if he recovers. If he did not reserve for himself any amount of land, his gift is not valid if he recovers. Rav Yosef bar Minumi says, or Nachman says, in the case of a person on his deathbed who wrote a deed granting all of his property to others, the manner in which he divided his property is examined. If it appears that he was intending to divide the entire estate among various recipients, then if he dies, all the recipients acquire the gifts. If he recovers, he can retract all the gifts in accordance with the ruling of the Mishnah. Okay. But if it appears that he was reconsidering the matter, initially intending to give away only a portion of his property and then reconsidering and distributing the rest, and then he dies, all of their recipients acquired their gifts. Kanu kulan. Amad enochazer el bachrin. V'dilma ayoni kamayin. V'hadar yati yahiv. Sisamil shivira midak dayak. V'yadar yahiv. Okay. But if it appears that he was reconsidering the matter, initially intending to give away only the portions of property and then reconsidering and distributing the rest, and then he dies, all the recipients acquire their gifts. If he recovers, he can retract only the last gift, as the previous gifts were given with the intent to reserve parts of the property for himself, as they are valid even if he recovers. The Gemara asks, perhaps he was not reconsidering, rather he initially intended to transfer ownership of all of his property, and he was considering to whom to give each portion and then giving it. The Gemara answers, the usual way of a person on his deathbed is to consider the matter carefully first, and only then confer his gifts. Therefore, if he pauses to consider in the interim, it appears that he did not initially intend to transfer ownership of his entire estate. Okay. Amar Rav Acha ben Yumi, Amar Rav Nachman, Shchiv ben Yehoshua v'chol nechas v'achayrim. Yamar ein nechoizo, chashin Shem lo yesh lo nechas v'medin acheros. Rav Acha ben Yumi says, or Nachman says, with regard to a person on his deathbed who wrote a deed granting all of his generally known property to others, and then he recovered, he cannot retract it, as we are concerned that perhaps he has property in another province that he reserved for himself, in which case the gift is valid even if he recovered. Ve'el masnisan katoni lo yishayal kal kakol shehu ein matanasai kayemes hechi bishkachas lo amar Rav Chama be'oimer kol nechosai mar bar Ashi omar be'muchzak lo ndelesle. The Gemara asks, but asks in Mishnah, which teaches, if he did not reserve for himself any amount of food, and he recovered, his gift is not valid. How can you find these circumstances? Rav Chama said. The Mishnah is referring to a case where he says, all my property is given to so-and-so, in which case he clearly reserved nothing for himself. Mar Barabashi said, the Mishnah is referring to a case where our presumption is that he does not have property elsewhere. Iboiluhu chazor b'miktzas, harei chazor b'chula. Ola, Hashema. Chula neroishen miktzas sheni kone, rishon lekone, ma'ilav b'shemeis. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to the gift of a person on his deathbed. Is a partial retraction of the gift considered retraction of the entire gift, or is it not considered retraction of the entire gift? The Gemara suggests, come and hear proof from a braise. If one gave all of his property to the first recipient and then not partially retracted his gift, and gave part of his property to the second recipient, the second acquired gift, but the first did not acquire anything, what is it not referring to? What? Is it not referring to a case where the giver died and the reason that the first recipient does not acquire anything is that partial retraction is considered retraction of the entire gift? No. The Gemara rejects this explanation. No. The Gemara, the Braita is referring to a case B'She'amad, where the giver recovered. The first gift was invalidated because he left nothing for himself, whereas the second gift remained valid since he gave only part of his property. Had he died, the first recipient would have received the remainder, as the giver retracted only part of the first gift which he gave to the second recipient. Achanami mistava mediktani seifo ish miksason rishoin v'chul l'sheni rishon kana sheni lekana iyamad v'shlom mishamad mishum hachi sheni lekana ela iyamad b'shemei tarvayu liknoi. Okay. Rav Yemar liknoi. No, not really. Liknoi. Yeah. The Gemara comments, so too is reasonable to understand the Braita in this manner. From the fact that the last clause of the Braita teaches, if he gave part of his money to the first recipient and then he gave all his money to the second recipient, the first recipient acquired his gift, but the second did not acquire anything. Granted, if you say that the Braita is referring to a case where the giver recovered due to that reason, the second recipient did not acquire the gift, but if you say that the Braita is referring to a case where he died, both of them should acquire their gifts. Amr, Le Rav Yemor Le Rav Ashi. V'azev Yinami Bishamad Yamrit Bishlam Chazar B'Mikzas Havi Chazar B'Chula Hainu Deshnei Misas Kana El Yamrit Chazara B'Mikzas Lehavi Chazar B'Chula Nila Kimachalik Ulachad Minay Lokanu Lo Liknu. Rav Yemor said to Rav Ashi, and even if the first clause of the mission is referring to a case where he recovered, one can prove that partial reaction is considered a reaction of the entire gift. Granted, if you say that the partial reaction is considered a retraction of the entire gift, this is the reason. That the least, at least the ground recipient acquired the gift, as the giver receives part of his property for himself. But if you say that a partial retraction is not considered a retraction of the entire gift, the gift should be considered as one who was finding all of his property between two recipients, and neither of them should acquire gifts. Okay. V'hilchaso, and the halach is chazor v'mikzas havi chazor v'chulo. Reish mizkachas ben shemeis ben shamad sefer mizkachas la el kishamad. Gemara concludes, and the halacha is partial retraction is considered a retraction of the entire gift. You find the halacha is stated in the first clause, the rights of both in both a case where the giver dies and a case where he recovered. You find the halacha that is stated in the entire clause only in a case where it is recovered. Iboilahu. They asked another dilemma. The sage asked another dilemma. Higdish kol nechas v'amad mahu. Mi amri kol legavi hegdish gamar uktani otilma kol legavi nafashe lo gamar mina. A series of dilemmas was used for the sages. If a person on deathbed consecrated all his property, to the temple treasury and subsequently recovered, what is the halacha? Do we say that in any case that concerns consecrated property, the assumption is that he resolves to transfer the property unconditionally, and therefore the construction is valid even if he recovers, or perhaps in any matter that concerns himself, he does not resolve to transfer the property unconditionally. Half-seed kol nechosav mahu. Half-seed kol nechosav mahu. Mi amrinan kevan de'ach lanim ke'ashirim gamar umeknei otil makol gabe nashe lo gamar umeknei. Furthermore, a person on his deathbed declared all of his property ownerless. What is the halacha? Do we say that since declaring his property ownerless for the benefit of the poor as well as the rich, it involves the potential mitzvah of providing for the poor, and therefore the assumption is that he resolves to transfer his property, declared ownerless initially, or perhaps in any matter that concerns himself, he does not resolve to transfer the property unconditionally. Okay. Chilo kol chasavlani mai mi amrin tzedaka vadai mi gamar mikni odil makol lagabe nafshe lo gamar makni teiko. Furthermore, if a person on his deathbed divided all the properties to be distributed to the poor, what is the halacha? Do we say that with regard to charity, the assumption is that the halacha, he currently resolves to transfer the property unconditionally, or perhaps in any matter that concerns him, he does not take any resolve to transfer the property unconditionally? The answer concludes, these dilemmas shall be unresolved. I lost count on the takers. Okay. Lishnachini. Gemara presents another version of the series of dilemmas. Hikdish kol nechasav mahu, hifke kol nechasav mahu, chili kol laniim mahu. if he declared on all. Okay. The Gemara presents another version of this series of dilemmas. If a person has on his deathbed consecrated all his property to the temple treasury, what's the halacha? If he declared all his property ownerless, what's the halacha? If he divided all his property to be disturbed to the poor, what's the halacha? These dilemmas shall stand unresolved. Amar Rav Sheshes Yitol v'Yiske v'Yachzik v'Yekone Kul Moshe Matanim B'Masnisa Atana Af Yachsen v'Yores. These are all in the 72 names. Baruch Yorsho Rav Yochanan ben Brokahi. That's it. Rosh says if one says so and so, take my property, so and so shall gain possession. Whoa. Rosh says if one says so and so shall take my property, or so and so shall gain possession of my property, or so and so shall take possession of my property, or he shall acquire my property. All of these are terms that denote the bestowal of gifts. It was taught in the Brite if one says so and so shall receive an inheritance, or so and so shall inherit. These are also valid terms denoting inheritance in the case of one who is fit to inherit from him, and this Brite is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who holds that one can bequeath all his property to one of his sons using terms that denote inheritance, not only using terms that denote the bestowal of a gift. Another series of dilemmas was raised for the sages. And that's it. Let's call it a daf.